Blessed be the name of Yahweh, and Shabbat Shalom. Those of you that's joining us, glad to have you with us online and local. And first time in a while, we actually have our media server working over at eliah.com/live. We got a video player functional. You can choose the stream quality you want, and right there within the player itself. So if you had any issues in the past, that should be resolved. And we also simulcast on certain tube sites and such. But I don't like to send anybody there. So anyway, YouTube is raw. It's just got everything you don't want to see on there, and some things you need to see, like this broadcast. Anyway, we're going to talk about Passover, Pesach, 2022, its meaning and its relevance. So many churches want to be relevant. Passover is very old feast, been around a long time, but it's very relevant. As we know, the world today is in a state of ongoing turmoil, stress, trouble. COVID-19 lasted longer than just 19. It ravaged the world, killed a lot of people, like 700-some thousand, maybe more than that, so they claim. The pestilence, the chaos, the whole world's wearing masks. Nobody really seems to know what's going on. Racial tensions are high. Our nation's debt, I don't know how they're going to get out of it. Certainly uncertainty right now, world peace, with invasion of Ukraine and the ripple effect. Who knows? World War III, who knows? Great tribulation may come out of this very thing. We don't know. Sin and sinful behavior is at an all-time high. Recent Gallup poll showed 1 out of 6 of our young people identify as LGBTQ, or whatever you call it. How sad. But it seems that people don't know who they are anymore. They don't know who they are anymore. And so they're looking for answers. Well, I want to tell you, we have an answer. We have an answer. You know, if I was a potter and I wanted to create a vessel, I would decide what that vessel would be. I would form it into what I wanted it to be. I would name it. I would decide its purpose. And the same is true of us. Man did not make himself. Creation did not create you. You are a created being, fearfully and wonderfully made. You know, it's high time we start looking to our Heavenly Father, Almighty Yahweh, for a definition of who we are. He's the potter. We're just the clay. In fact, we're made out of dust. We're made out of dust. And He formed us. But, we have to believe who He says He says we are. We have to embrace who He says we are. And, Yahweh also identifies Himself. We don't get to define Him. We don't get to form our own Elohim and decide who He is. He will be who He is, whether you want Him to be that or not. He will be, and He is who He is. I am that which I am. He will cause to be that which is caused to be. He will cause to be that which is. That's what His name means. He identifies Himself as the mighty one of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. How many times do you see Him identifying Himself as, I am Yahweh, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage? Many times we see Him identifying Himself that way. A lot of times when people hear that story of how Yahweh brought the children of Israel out of the house of bondage, out of the land of Egypt, they kind of That's for those people over there, the people way back then, what happened to them. And we don't have any real connection or relevance to that today. We're Christians. Or we're living in the 21st century, We're not living back then. But, I hope by the time we're done talking about this topic today, you will find yourself very, very connected to what happened way back then to those people back in that time. Because just as He delivered them from Egypt, He delivered me from my own personal Egypt. I was in slavery to sin. He delivered me from this carnal house of bondage right here. To the extent He says, I died, house of bondage died, and a new creation has been formed, the house of Yahweh. That's who we are, collectively, His house. And just as He chose to identify Himself to Israel, He can identify Himself that way to you also. We just have to understand that the plan of salvation is literally written in the history of the Israelite nation. The whole plan of salvation is written in that. In fact, that's one of the reasons why we regard the Bible to be such an inspired work. Cannot possibly have been produced by man. The actual story of our personal salvation mirrors that, what the children of Israel were going through when they came out of Egypt. First, we got to know who we are. We got to identify ourselves with who He says we are, because the way you see yourself will help you, actually will direct your actions. Nothing will impact your actions more than who or what you identify yourself to be. If a guy decides he wants to be a baseball player, what do you think his actions are going to be? He'll be out there practicing, right? Olympian. How about a biker? How about a lawyer? People's actions follow what they decide they are, or who they decide they are. Man wants to be a doctor. That's going to be his identity. He's going to study 8 years of college and get his doctorate in the field of medicine. Well, what if the Heavenly Father had an identity for you? Would that affect your actions? Would that affect the way you live your life? Yahweh calls you a believer. He calls you a saint or a holy one. He calls you His children. He calls you a peculiar people. He calls you a light of the world. And there's one thing He calls you that's very important. And that is, He calls you Yisrael. Ephesians chapter 2, verse 11 says, Therefore remember that you, once Gentiles in the flesh, who were called uncircumcision by what is called the circumcision made in the flesh by hands. He's saying at one time you were Gentiles. Once Gentiles. He's talking to the Ephesians here. He's not talking to Gentiles. He says, you were once Gentiles in the flesh. He says, at that time you were without Messiah. You were aliens from the commonwealth of Israel. You are strangers from the covenants. What covenants? All the covenants given to Israel. You were a stranger to. Having no hope and without Elohim in the world. But now Messiah Yahshua, you who once were far off have been brought near by the blood of the Messiah. So you were once a stranger, the commonwealth of Israel. You were once a stranger. You were once an alien, right? Now you're not anymore. That means you are Israel. If you're not a stranger from Israel, now you are Israel. Right? And strangers from the covenants, he says, from the covenants of promise. What covenants of promise are you talking about? How about the new covenant? A lot of people say, well, that old covenant, that's with them Jewish people back then. Well, who's the new covenant with? Behold, the days are coming, says Yahweh, I will make a new covenant with the Gentiles. Doesn't say that. It says, I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. Not according to the covenant that I made with whose fathers? Jewish people, Israelite people's fathers. In the day I took them, who? Judah, Israel, by the hand to lead them out of the land of Egypt, my covenant which they broke, though I was a husband to them, says Yahweh. But this is the covenant I will make with who? The house of Israel. After those days, I will put my law. What law is he talking about here? This is Jeremiah speaking. What law is he talking about? The only law there ever was. Yahweh's law given through Moshe. He's going to put it in their minds, write it on their hearts. I will be their mighty one. They shall be my people. Don't think for a moment just because they're written in stone had nothing to do with the heart. Even the 10th commandment written in stone says don't covet your neighbor's house or his wife or anything your neighbor's. That's a heart commandment. Only can be violated in the heart. It was always about the heart. He says, no more shall every man teach his neighbor, every man his brother, saying, know Yahweh, for they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest of them, says Yahweh. And here's the big kicker right here. I will forgive their iniquity and their sin I will remember no more. That is the new covenant promise, the forgiveness of sin. Anyone who joins to that covenant gets guaranteed forgiveness of sin. That was not like the old covenant. Old covenant was conditional. Okay? Anyone part of that new covenant, you become now saved. You become Israel. That's what we just read. One time you were a stranger from the covenant of promise. Now you're not a stranger anymore. You've been brought near by the blood of Messiah. That means you are Israel. That's not a new idea, actually. Look at the book of Esther, chapter 8, 17. Every province and city, wherever the king's command and decree came, the Jews had joy and gladness, a feast and a holiday. Then many people of the land became Jews. Well, you can't just become a Jew physically, right? Has to be done spiritually. You don't just become a Jew. It says they did. People of the land became Jews because fear of the Jews fell upon them. How can that be? You become joined up like Ruth. Ruth was a Moabite. She says, oh no, my people, your people are my people. Your Elohim's my Elohim. Where you go, I go. Okay? They will come. They'll be looking for one who identifies himself as Israelite to follow. Let's be called by your name, right? Well, there's another promise that you need to know about where Yahweh will identify himself as the one who does more than just bring the children of Israel out of Egypt. Behold, the days are coming, says Yahweh. I will raise to David a branch of righteousness. A king shall reign and prosper, execute judgment and righteousness in the earth. In his days Judah will be saved and Israel will dwell safely. Now this is his name by which he will be called Yahweh, our righteousness. This is what the Messiah will be called in the age to come. When he rules and reigns for 1,000 years, he will be called Yahweh Tzidkenu, Yahweh, our righteousness. Why? Because it was through the Messiah Yahweh gave us righteousness. This was all predicted. Everything that Yahshua did for us was predicted. We have physical copies of the book of Jeremiah that predate what was the time the era Messiah lived. And this is all predicted. Therefore, the days are coming, says Yahweh, they shall no longer say, as Yahweh lives, who brought up the children of Israel from the land of Egypt. But this, in Jeremiah 33, says, 23. But as Yahweh lives, who brought up and led the descendants of the house of Israel from the north country, from the countries where I had driven them, and they shall dwell in their own land. So there will be a second Exodus where, first of all, we're all going to meet Yahshua in the air, right? We're going to be brought up out of wherever we are, and we're going to meet him in the air, and he's going to be our mighty one, and we're going to be ruling and reigning with Yahshua for 1,000 years. And we'll identify him as being the one who did that for us, okay? But there will also be a physical exodus as well that will occur, where Yahweh will bring the physical descendants from the house of Israel into their own land once again. But we have to know who we are. 1 Peter 2:9 says, "You are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation." You are a holy nation. You are a royal priesthood. A royal priesthood, meaning you're both priest and king. You have royalty. The blood of Yahshua is in you, is upon you. So you have royal blood, right? You're royalty. We're kings. Young ladies, you are true princesses. Real princesses. No Disney gobbledygook. Real princesses of the most powerful being in the universe, Yahweh. How's that for an identity? Ain't going to beat that one. Not going to top that one. We're princes. Praise Yahweh. You are his own special people. For you to be the special person, he looks at and says, that's a special person right there. That is a tremendous honor, that you may proclaim the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Beautiful, marvelous light. And once you realize who you are Israel, you are that holy nation of Israel. You don't look at what happened in Passover as something that happened to them people way back then or whatever. Sure it did, but you identify yourself. That was my ancestors. Can you grab a hold of that one? It's my ancestors. I become Israel. How'd you become Israelite? Scripture says, I have been crucified with Messiah. It is no longer I who live. I don't live anymore. But Messiah lives in me. In the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of Elohim who loved me and gave himself for me. Isn't that what we're all looking for? Someone to love us? Here's someone that loved you and loves you and gives himself for you. And so if Yahshua lives in you, then your identity becomes his identity. If you don't live, Yahshua now lives in you, you identify yourself with him. And so his history becomes your history. Just as he was crucified, you've been crucified. Just as he was Israelite, you are Israelite. And that's why it says, Galatians 3:29, if you are Messiahs, then you are Abraham's seed. Period. You are Abraham's seed. Praise Yahweh. Well, I'll tell you what. To be a child of Abraham means you get to partake in all those promises that are given to Israel. Richard. Praise Yahweh. So when we're talking about Passover, I want to take a minute and look through those lenses. That while we know that Passover is a memorial for something that took place to our forefathers in Messiah Yahshua, it also stands as a memorial for what Yahweh plans to do for you and has done for you personally. So not only is it a memorial of what he has done for you in saving you by the blood of the Lamb, also a memorial for what he's going to do. That great Exodus, that second Exodus, when we will meet him in the air. But right now, 2022, let's see how we can identify ourselves with what they went through. Exodus 1:8 says, "Now there arose a new king over Egypt." This is the context of all the seeds of the sons of Abraham, daughters of Abraham, all living in Egypt, because Joseph brought his father and his brothers there, and they did not know Joseph. And he said to the people, he said, "Look, the people of the children of Israel," this is Pharaoh speaking, "are more and mightier than we." They're greater and mightier than we are. "And so let's deal shrewdly with them," he said, "lest they multiply." He was afraid they would get too large. "And it happened in the event of war that they also join our enemies and fight against us, and so go up out of the land." They were afraid that they were going to leave. They were afraid the Israelites were going to go somewhere else. They wanted to keep them there where they were. They knew they were being blessed because of them. Now, it's true also that just as Pharaoh did not want them to multiply, he does not want enemy, Satan the devil, does not want us to multiply either. He wants us to not multiply. He wants to keep us low in number. Okay? And please understand, you are of Elohim, little children, have overcome them, because he who is in you is greater than he who is in the world. See, just as Pharaoh was afraid because the children of Israel will become too great and too mighty and too high and too powerful, the truth is, Satan the devil knows that the one who's in us is greater than him, that one who's in the world. Okay? And so, just as Pharaoh knew who was greater, Satan knows who is greater because of who we are. We are the seed of Abraham in Messiah. Well, just like Moshe, he was adopted, wasn't he? You know, Esther was adopted. Actually, if you're adopted, you're in pretty good company. If you're adopted, even Yahshua was adopted. Messiah was adopted. Because Joseph was not his natural born father. He had to adopt him, right? And the truth is, we're all adopted. Because even if we are not naturally of Israel, we just read several scriptures that showed we are Israel through the Messiah, Yahshua. We are called, what? The seed of Abraham. It says you are the seed of Abraham. You are Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise. All right, so did you know that if they, natural-born Jews, put their faith in the Messiah, they have to be grafted back in? In a sense that Romans 11:23 says that they do not continue in unbelief, will be grafted in, talking about the Jewish people, they have to be grafted back in because Elohim is able to graft them in again. He broke them off if they were not believers. He broke them off. And so, but they can be grafted back in, just like a branch gets grafted back into a tree. He says, if you were cut out of the olive tree, which is wild, it's the Gentiles by nature, and were grafted contrary to nature into a cultivated olive tree, planted and cared for by Yahweh, how much more will these, who are the natural branches, be grafted into their own olive tree? So please understand, it's never about who you are, who your physical father is. It's about who you've made your heavenly Father in your life. And if he is your mighty one, if you put your trust in the Messiah, then you will become Israel. Now here's the amazing thing. Because we're going to keep going through this book of Exodus, chapter 1 and other chapters, and find that just as they were saved from Pharaoh, we also were saved from Satan, the devil, in the same way. It says they set taskmasters over them. to afflict them with their burdens. And that's what Satan does to us. He sends his demons to afflict us. And they built for Pharaoh supply cities, Pithom and Ramses. And just as Pharaoh had Israel building up his kingdom, Satan has people that are not believers building up his kingdom. They may not know they are, but they are. And the more afflicted them, it says, the more they multiplied and grew. And they were in dread of the children of Israel. So the Egyptians made the children of Israel serve with rigor. And they made their lives bitter with hard bondage, in mortar, in brick, in all manner of service in the field. All their service in which they made them serve was with rigor. Then the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, of whom the one was Shiphrah and the name of other was Puah. He said, when you do the duties of a midwife for the Hebrew women and see them on the birth stools, if it's a son, you shall kill him. If it's a daughter, she shall live. But the midwives feared Elohim. Elohim is the Hebrew word commonly translated God. And did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the male children alive. Now, please understand, I've noticed a lot of times people who have had difficult upbringings, people who've had difficult lives, have suffered tremendous loss, have been mistreated by a lot of people. They find themselves to be believers at some point. It's not because of necessarily even the fact that they were afflicted. Can be. But it might be just the fact Satan knew who they were predestined to be. Right? Just as he knew these were the sons of Abraham. They have a tremendous promise upon them. He wanted to destroy them, afflict them, make them serve with rigor, give them a miserable life as much as he could, because he knew their destiny. And so sometimes those of us who have difficult backgrounds, we find ourselves to be believers later in life simply because the enemy knew our destiny was to be his, our Heavenly Father's children. Okay? And I've seen this. You'll see certain people just seem like they get picked on all the time. And we wonder, why are they always getting picked on and the other guys just got no problems in their life? And sometimes it's because the enemy knows who you are. He's already figured out who you are. All right? So what happened? They tried to destroy them. Okay? And now, just as they were sold into slavery, we also, all of us, have been sold into slavery. Romans 7:14 says, we know the law is spiritual, but I am carnal, sold under sin. The Messiah taught us, I say to you, whoever commits sin is a slave of sin. Everyone's a slave. Everyone is a slave. Just make a decision who you're going to be a slave to. We know who they were a slave to. Exodus 3:7, what happened? Yahweh said, I have surely seen the oppression of my people who are in Egypt, have heard their cry because of their taskmasters, for I know their sorrows. Oh, come on. How can Yahweh know what they're going through? All this whippings and beatings and hard labor and rigor, and how could he know what they're going through?